This week on Security Weekly, John Kindervag joins us from Forrester Research in our technical segment, PwnPad 4 Bluetooth scanning with a new tool from Pony Express called Blue Hydra. We're going to sniff Bluetooth from my new Segway. In our stories of the week, Pokemon Go yourself and Adobe and Microsoft issue patches. Go figure. All that and more, so stay tuned. This is a Security Weekly production. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly is brought to you by the SANS Institute, the most trusted source for computer security training, certification, and research. Visit SANS.org to explore the full curriculum and latest training offerings. Analyst, the leading provider of solutions to protect ERP systems from cyber attacks. Customers can secure their SAP and Oracle business-critical platforms from espionage, sabotage, and financial fraud risks. Visit them on the web at onapsys.com. Pony Express. Check out their line of penetration testing devices, including the PwnPad, the PwnPhone, and the PwnPro. For enterprises, there's PwnPulse, providing continuous visibility into wired, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth spectrums across all physical locations, including remote sites and branch offices. For all those hard-to-reach places, there's Pony Express. Visit them on the web at ponyexpress.com. Welcome, everyone, to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. This is episode 474, and I'm, of course, as always, very excited to do the show. This evening, we've got a packed show for you. I want to introduce the illustrious Mr. Joff Thayer. Joff, welcome to the show.
G'day, Paul. Happy to be here on another wonderfully baking hot Thursday here in the Carolinas.
And Joff, it's just me and you tonight, man. I mean, other than our special guests that are joining us this evening.
Well, we call that the A team.
Yes, we brought our A game tonight. It's amazing how people's schedules allow for just Joff and I to enjoy a quiet evening together, which is it's just lovely. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, Joff.
Oh, me too.
So, announcements. I don't think I have any. Joff, you're teaching next week.
I am. I'm teaching a private next week, and then I am teaching SANS Network Security in Las Vegas the week of September 12th. So come on out and join us in Vegas. We'll have a great time.
And maybe next week we'll do the technical segment that you've been working on and I've been testing?
Well, I'm not sure it's possible.
Oh, because you're going to be teaching.
Ensconced, but
wow. So they're gonna have to wait for the awesome technical segment that Joff's been working on till after Black Hat.
I think everybody's going to be very excited about the partnership code that goes with the DNS black holing stuff.
Yes. That
I've been working on, and Paul is testing, and we're actually getting pretty jazzed about it. So I think it's going to be a fun tech segment.
It's pretty cool. There was some hilarity that ensued at my desk when I was testing it today. I was one of those well, of course. It's pretty funny. I want to introduce our special guest for this evening, John Kindervag from Forrester Research. John has more than 25 years of tech experience and is best known for creating the highly influential Zero Trust model of information security. He advises both public and private sector organizations. He did a webcast with me when I was at Tenable, which is awesome. I had forgotten about that. And John has been all over the news and interviewed on several different publications. It's an honor to have John here with us today. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here and talk with everybody. It's my first time being with you, so but I've known this show from its reputation for a long time.
Well, actually, you know what to expect.
I do.
That's good.
I do.
So, John, how did you get your start in information security?
Crazy enough, I'm old, so there wasn't information security, but I was a television producer and director, and then I started doing animation and had to learn how to build computers to be able to afford to do it. And then I wanted to network it, and then I found out there's more money in IT than television. So I switched over IT, and that led to security, and eventually Forrester called me some many years later.
John, what are some of the practical things that people can take away from the zero trust network architecture?
Well, I think the practical things are, first of all, that it's data centric, right? We start at the inside. And I think about when I was building networks, you'd start at the farthest edge. You'd start at the edge router, and then you'd like put in a firewall, and then you'd put in a core switch, and on and on and on. And you'd spend a lot of time worrying about things that businesses don't care about, like spanning tree. No one in a business cares about spanning tree, but as networkers, we care a lot about it. And then when people decide they're going to plug data into the system, we just didn't care, and we didn't know where the data is. And fundamentally, that's the biggest problem that we have. So zero trust is first and foremost a data-centric architecture. You find the data, you build a micro perimeter around it, you connect it to everything else, you restrict access based upon who needs to have access to a particular data type, and then you constantly monitor it to make sure that it's that it's functioning, and that you don't have to do something new to it. And what it does is it gives you a tremendous amount of visibility about what's going on in your network, and has the potential, I think, to incredibly increase the friction that an attacker would have in order to breach your data.
It's interesting, John. Oftentimes when I start advising companies on security, it very quickly leads to exactly what you're talking about, and I advise them to define the different sensitivity levels or importance of their data, identify where that data lives, identify who owns the data, and then identify who should have access to it. And until you do that, you really can't build anything else. Is that a useful exercise in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I run two playbooks at Forrester. So Forrester has playbooks which are end-to-end view of any topic. So I run network security architecture and operations, which is where the zero trust network architecture is. But I also run data security and privacy. And I created a thing called the Data Security and Control Framework, and it does exactly what you just said, Paul. It breaks it out into defining your data, where is it, and how toxic is it, how sensitive is it, and then you dissect the data, how is it being used, how should it be used, and then finally you defend it. You defend it with a zero trust network. But what I discovered in doing the research was no matter how many products we deploy, we're only doing really four things to data. When we protect it, we're controlling access to the data. We're inspecting that access. We think disposing of the data is pretty important, so get rid of the stuff that you don't need. And then finally, killing the data, abstracting it through tokenization, masking, or encryption. And all those things together, the way we tune it, helps us create a stronger, more powerful network.
I find it really helps when guiding people in terms of vulnerability management, patching, and the software development lifecycle and secure software, because all three of those things really stem, like they have this one problem in common where if you have a large organization with, over 10,000 employees, those three things are so huge, right? I get so much data from vulnerability management. I can't possibly patch everything all at once. And I've got so many applications that I can't secure them all. So where do I start? And that's when I come back to the data conversation.
Yeah, well, you have to understand which data is potentially being dealt with from a vulnerability standpoint. I mean, I used to run a vulnerability assessment practice, and you get in all this information, you give it to the client. Which one do you do first? Well, this is a level 5 because it's got a CVE and a cert thing and blah, blah, blah. But will that impact me as an organization? No one knows. So we talk a lot about how to prioritize patching based upon not only the vulnerability, but the data toxicity, and then how easy is it or likely is it that someone is going to use that particular vulnerability to get at your data.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to the way we do threat modeling in the software sense. We need to do it in the network and data sense. And if you don't know those things about your data, then you've already lost. You can't do the threat model, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very hard to know what is an attacker going to do. It's hard to do prediction. It's hard to do risk modeling in our business. We can't build actuarial tables. So we can't control much anymore. We can't control the devices. We have BYOD, you have mobility, you have IoT, you have the cloud. We were talking about that before. Cloud is the number one inhibitor or security is the number one inhibitor of cloud adoption. We have to change that. So what is the one thing that you can control? Well, you can control the data. That's the one thing that the enterprise still has an ability to control. And given the movement, say with the GDPR in Europe, we're going to have more control of our data, not less, over time.
I find many organizations look for the industry standard best practice, the next security technology, but they haven't done the exercise to keep tabs on their data. And when you talk to them about that, they're like, "Oh, that's a lot of work." And it's like, yeah, you can't just go buy something to do this. So what advice do you have for companies that are kind of putting this off and not doing it because it's too complicated, it's too much work, there's politics at play? What advice do you have for companies?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, because something is difficult, something is hard, isn't an excuse to not do it. Dan Kaminsky said at an event I was at with him, he said, we, meaning, people in information security, we worship hard. We worship the hard things. So hard shouldn't be an excuse. But I think most importantly, we have a really antiquated model around data classification that's paper-based, that doesn't work in a digital era. So we've redefined that at Forrester. We've simplified it. There's only 3 levels. It's based upon how you protect the data, not how you intuitively think about it. So my advice is you look at the data, figure out how you need to protect it, and that will tell you its classification or its toxicity. And we have, tools that help people do that. So, but I agree with you absolutely.
Michael Santarcangelo has joined us. Welcome, Michael.
Sir.
Thanks for joining us this evening. So, John, let's talk about cloud. Let's talk about cloud. The decision seems to be split 3 ways when I talk to primarily security people and even sometimes IT or operations folks about cloud and software as a service adoption. It's either no cloud or, maybe there's like an approval process for that, or we're working on a project, or yeah, we're all in with cloud. There seems to be a smaller percentage of we're all in with cloud than the other 2 areas. Why aren't we seeing more people kind of latch onto this idea, and what can we do to educate people about the right way to move to cloud and software as a service?
Well, I think we have to just say you're going to have to do it, right? So quit fighting it. The genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back in. And you can fight it all day long, but then you become an inhibitor of the business. The business ends up not liking you. So in many ways, it's the cloud exists because we in IT, we in security, were not agile enough to solve the problems of the business, so they figured out a way to get around that. And you used to see it. I mean, I would go to places and they'd be proudly showing me off the data center that some business unit built, so they didn't have to go through IT because IT was just saying no or taking too long. And when the cloud came, people jumped on it. And in many ways, we have to take a lot of that blame. So instead of trying to say no because we're scared of it or it could impact our job, we have to understand that we have to figure out a way to say yes and do it in the right way. And I think there's tools and things that we can do to say yes. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in our business.
Yeah, what advice do you have for organizations that are largely, kind of have the brick and mortar data centers that want to move to the cloud, and it's just such a massive project that they're like, yeah, we're working on it, but it's going to be 2 years before we start migrating. And I run into this when I advise people about patching. I'm like, the way to patch things is to be all in the cloud and be virtual. It makes patching so much easier. And they're like, yeah, that's like a year or two away. Like, what do we do in the meantime? And in the meantime, they still have those traditional problems.
Well, I think you need to figure out what workloads you're going to put in the cloud. Some things don't move very well into the clouds. You have to determine the toxicity of those workloads, right? How toxic are they? How much trouble? And by toxicity, I mean how much trouble do your company get if there's a breach, the data goes outside of your control, and that determines the toxicity level of the data. And then how do you think that you can control that, right? So I think there's two main things that most people need when they move to the cloud. And the number one is visibility. What's going on inside the cloud? And two is probably data encryption. I think that's really, really important when you move workloads to the cloud. You want to be able to encrypt not everything in the workload, but the toxic data, so that if it's exfilled, if it's breached, you don't get into trouble if you've done good key management. So if you look at what Salesforce announced last week with their Bring Your Own Keys initiative, we've been saying essentially the same thing. We've been calling it Bring Your Own Encryption. But I think one of the things that you do to solve cloud security worries is you leverage encryption more, and you bring your own keys or bring your own encryption to the cloud, and then you leverage what the cloud provider has for security, and then you extend that with other tooling that you might have as ability to deal with.
I completely agree. It's interesting. 7 or 8 years ago, John, we made the move to Google Apps for Business for email. And we said, well, any sensitive email, we're just going to encrypt with PGP. Now, we're a small technical group, so we can get away with that in that particular technology. But that model applies to all enterprises today, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't you be doing it? Right? I mean, this is a thing that is, I think, functionally has been solved, right? I mean, so a quick story, if it's okay. I have a geek bucket list of the geeks that I want to meet. So you're on my bucket list, Paul.
I'm very honored to be on your bucket list, John. Thank you.
So I was at an event at Stanford, and I saw Whit Diffie having lunch in the courtyard. So I just went up to the guy and just to say, hey, I appreciate everything you've done, and he invited me to have lunch with him. So I got to serendipitously have lunch with Whit Diffie. But we were talking, and he pointed out that in his opinion, encryption was a solved problem. Key management was the problem that was all messed up. And I agree with that. I mean, I've written about that. And if we can manage the keys properly, we can solve issues around, data breach privacy laws. We can shield ourselves from that. We can shield ourselves from data residency issues, because that's going to be a big gotcha for people. It's going to be bigger than cloud, because how do you run a multinational corporation when there's all these weird draconian laws tied to geography that don't have any sense of how the internet works and how routing protocols work? How are you going to ever keep data inside of Germany when you have all these weird hot potato routes rolling around between various data centers? So I think that's one of my big things, is if we can embrace that more and not be so afraid of encryption and not focus on the encryption stuff, but on the key management stuff, it'll go a long way, because most people learn about encryption from the movies, right? And it looks like it's easy to break. Oh, they broke it in between commercials. And that's not really true.
John, you mentioned visibility into the cloud, and this is an emerging area that I've seen kind of explode in the past 6 months to a year. So many security providers are offering their solutions in the cloud and are partnering with more traditional cloud management, IT operations software that exists in the cloud. What advice do you have for people who are looking to gain more operational and security type visibility into their cloud deployments?
Well, I think you need to look at your existing tooling and look at what you're doing in your own data center, in your own internal network. See if you have technologies that are applicable to the cloud, because all of these vendors, the next generation firewall vendors, all those people, they're all creating virtualized versions to insert into the cloud. And as we have the ability to insert these things as a service inside of cloud workloads as we move forward, it's going to become easier and easier. So now the issue becomes, how do you manage that? And I think the management of all this tooling is what you need to be focused on a fair bit as well.
Michael Joff, any questions specifically about cloud or software as a service applications?
Well, I had one thought, but if I go there, it'd be kind of a political question. So I guess I'll pitch to Mike and first, and let him talk about the problems we're trying to solve.
Yes.
And maybe I'll come back to my question.
No, look, I don't have questions because mostly I agree. I mean, it's the same things that I've written about, and it's the same things that I see. You can lead to it, or you can bitch about it and be left behind. Those are your two choices.
Oh, I suppose I better ask my question.
Yeah, ask your. I'm curious.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm curious now too, Joe.
Not.
Yeah, so I'm curious. You said we touched on the encryption and key management topic. There's a little bit. This is my perception, but there's a little bit of a public backlash against encryption right now, based on geopolitical events. How do you see that impacting cloud strategies in general, and do you see any kind of immediate threats there from a policy or political perspective?
I look at it from the perspective that the technology sector that's going to be controlling the technology is very understanding of this problem and very much saying privacy is really, really important. And we have to realize that we live in a global world. So, when you look at what's happening in the EU with GDPR and some of the other countries in other parts of the world, there's certainly going to be geopolitical ramifications to anything that anybody does. But for the average person, I don't think we're going to have, the back doors that the FBI wants in there. I don't think you're going to have, some degradation of cryptography. I think Apple did a great job of drawing a line in the sand. I live in Texas, so they were the Colonel Travis of that Alamo there, and everybody lined up. Even if some of them, like Bill Gates, did it kind of tentatively. They lined up and said, "Yeah, we can't do this." And quite frankly, the NSA revelations that Snowden leaked were such a negative economic impact to the cloud business. Billions of dollars of revenue lost because of that, and it's all because the government could snoop. And so economically, we can't afford to do that. And yeah, it may be a hiccup in the short term in law enforcement, but you're even seeing Michael Hayden and some of those guys coming out in favor of being able to leverage encryption as you need to.
That's a great answer. I think this is the moment where we say, rah, rah, support the EFF, but it sounds like the informed opinion is turning, and that's what I hear in your answer, which is, I think, critically important, and I couldn't agree more. So
well,
that's my big. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's interesting because at Forrester we have these things called market imperatives that the entire country adopted, or the entire company adopts, and one of them now, the newest one, is privacy, and that's a huge thing from a company like ours because one, we have some influence, but two, it's across all the different roles and customers that we serve, not just the security people. So we see privacy as a huge thing, and as we get a more technically savvy government, I think we'll have less of these discussions. I mean, remember, there's only 2 congressmen out of 435 that have a degree in computer science. Mm-hmm. And so the people writing the laws really don't understand what's going on. They think it's a bunch of tubes Yep. They don't understand what the real problem is.
Hey, we have the same problem in the judicial branch.
That leads really to an interesting follow-on conundrum and question that we're dealing with in the industry, I think. And that follow-on is, how do we change that? How do we remedy that as an industry? Other than hoping that some of our own people will run for Congress. Have you got any thoughts on that matter?
Well, I think you are going to be in a situation where, if you have a voice, you want to tell people, yeah, don't be afraid of this stuff. It's not really affecting law enforcement. I think that that's a bit of a red herring. This whole thing with the guy in San Bernardino, that was about setting precedents in the law, and not about really the problems of decrypting the phone. There was nothing on that phone. Everybody that I've talked to said there was nothing on the phone, and they knew there was nothing on the phone, because if they thought there was something on the phone, they would have done it in one of the secret courts. So yeah. We're in this time of manipulation, and those of us who are in technology, in the industry, have to educate people. Write your congressman, tell your congressman to have people who understand the technologies involved in helping draft some of these new laws that are coming out. John McCain understands how to fly an F-4 fighter jet, but I don't know that he's the guy who should be introducing legislation about cryptography, and apparently he is. So, admire his service for our country and what he did as a POW, but that doesn't qualify you to write laws about a technology you don't understand.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, well, this would be a big rabbit hole, so I'll kick it back to Paul.
Well, yeah, I was just going to segue into when you spoke about privacy, John, and big data. And, a lot of companies have pretty much already adopted big data technologies. The number one question that I think we get about big data is, well, we've, deployed this big data technology database, and it's different, right? It's a different technology. It's Hadoop, it's MongoDB, whatever. What are the best practices around how we secure these? It seems that there is a gap, unless that gap is slowly closing, but what advice do you have for people looking to secure their big data installations?
Well, it's the same two things that you start with. It's visibility, it's access control, it's encryption. I mean, if you look at, there's 4 big commercial distros of Hadoop. Mm-hmm. Cloudera bought Gazang, I guess about 2 years ago now, clearly recognizing that they needed to get out ahead of the security implications. All the other vendors, MapR and Hortonworks and IBM all have integrations with encryption vendors. They have ability clearly to give people log files, and in fact could become a big logging mechanism of their own. We're using big data all the time in logging now, aren't we? So that kind of is converging, and then doing the basic access control and that kind of stuff is really interesting as well. So I think the vendors get it. I talked to them quite a bit. We've written some early stuff on it, and we're mapping some of the partner ecosystems right now. But it's the same problem. The Hadoop is a type of cloud. Everything is a cloud now, right? Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounds like the more commercial, larger vendors are starting to figure out security, likely from pressure from their customers. So that would be a route to go. Some of the customers are looking into more of the open source alternatives, and I think they're running into a struggle finding information about security best practices and hardening in the right way to implement their technologies.
Well, it's always a struggle when you're rolling your own and you're trying to do it on the cheap, because one is where is the technical support going to come from? Two, you're often limited to that 1 or 2 people in your organization who are really intense gurus on a particular subject, but what happens when they get stolen away? So security is always a pay me now or pay me later kind of business. And you have to decide, do you invest more up front in hopes that you won't have as many challenges later on, or are you going to be pretty stingy on the front end and then suddenly realize, Joe or Bob or Sam, whoever was our HDFS Linux guru, just left for a really good paying job at company X, and now we can't even get into our database. Those are kind of the trade-offs that you have, I think.
John, I saw an interesting talk that you gave about the comparison between hunting vampires or werewolves and the similar to looking for so-called cyber threats, right? Can you tell our listeners about that? That was a great concept.
Where were you when you saw that? Were you in Chicago?
No, it's online. It's on YouTube.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea. Okay, well, see, they didn't even tell me they were filming that.
That's funny.
So everybody says, well, it's not a silver bullet. Like there is a silver bullet. And so years ago, I was in New Orleans in a voodoo shop looking at a vampire killing kit. And I realized then that, there was a silver bullet, there was a gold bullet, there was some other kind of bullet, there was a stake, there was all these other things. And as I started researching vampires, I realized how analogous it was to security because...
Now, wait, did you have like a vampire threat that was imminent that you were researching this and looking at that in the store?
No, I was just wandering through New Orleans.
That's a couple of hurricanes.
Trying to stay out of trouble, right?
It's all done at that point.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I realized, as I was talking to this person, they were telling me, who was an expert in vampires, was, Croatian vampires are killed differently than Romanian vampires, than German vampires, than Philippine vampires. And so you need an entire kit. That's why they would build these kits.
So wait, was there garlic and a mirror in the kit as well?
Yeah. There was garlic,
Nice.
mirror, holy water, a stake, a cross. There was, a flintlock pistol with 3 different balls. One was made out of silver, one was made out of gold, and I don't remember the third metal. Yeah, sure, all that stuff was in there. And in fact, I have a picture of it that I do in that thing. So instead of saying the silver bullet, I say, well, a silver bullet never worked. You have to have a lot of things in your hacker killing kit. So that was the purpose of that.
Along those lines, there are a lot of somewhat emerging, and some of them have been around for a while, but I wanted to get your take on, I believe you wrote an article or did a webinar on DDoS mitigation. Where do we stand today with DDoS mitigation, given that 100 gigabits a second can be generated from the internet today? I mean, heck, you could do that with hacked IoT devices. Where do we stand with DDoS mitigation? Is it something that organizations should seriously consider, and why or why not?
Yeah, I think if you have assets on the internet that if they go down from a DDoS perspective and you can't function, you have to have some level of it, right? And it's where you put it and how much you put, how much you spend on it. You end up with these big scrubbing services, and how fast can you converge routes to clean stuff? I mean, eventually you would think that we'd all be handed a clean pipe automatically, but that's really not how the internet works. So we have to pay for it somewhere. And from a bandwidth perspective, all the big carriers and DDoS service providers are doubling down on infrastructure now so they can handle the kinds of pipes. But of course, they're going to want to get paid for it as well. So, but technologically, lots of people have figured out how to solve it. It's just it's one more thing that people have to understand and learn about, and then spend money on to protect against. And what's interesting about it, Paul, is that people, if they don't get a DDoS attack within their contract, oftentimes they say, "Oh, I'm not going to use it because I won't get DDoS because I haven't got DDoS." So it shows you how we're trying to figure out probabilities in this world that we can't.
I got a follow on to that real quick, Paul. Do you, and maybe this is a bit of an obscure question, but do you think the customer-facing ISPs should take a bigger role in the DDoS protection game?
Yeah, I think not only should they take a bigger role, they are taking a bigger role. I mean, Verizon just announced they're upgrading their pipe to some X number of petabits, I think, and NTT is saying they're doubling down. So yeah, those vendors should really probably provide us a lot of clean traffic. I mean, DDoS, why would you ever want DDoS to come to you in the first place? So the carriers are the perfect place to stop it. And it's just, everybody's afraid of stopping good stuff, so they allow a lot of bad stuff to come into their network.
The other thing we're starting to see, I just got this from my hosting provider. They sent me a note and said, oh, by the way, we're going to give you DDoS protection, no extra charge. So, the thing we're seeing now is, in the last year or so, it was, okay, we'll give you an SSL certificate. Now it's, we'll do it for free, we'll install it automatically. Oh, no extra charge, we'll give you DDoS protection. So we're seeing it at a lot of levels where people are rolling this in. It doesn't cost me an extra $1 for DDoS protection or an SSL certificate on my website anymore.
And whether the free DDoS protection works or not, I think is always been challenged.
That's not a call to test it.
Yeah. What's your website, Michael?
Can you give me your
what's your domain?
Your place?
I think it was.
And that's the value of a capitalist society, and competition is it drives prices down. So when there was one or two DDoS providers, it was very expensive, and then the more people who said, "Oh, we can make money at that," the less it is. But DDoS is, the fact that there are DDoS service providers is kind of accidental, because originally they were big DNS players. You look at Newstar, you look at VeriSign. They had to have DDoS protection because the only thing being DDoS back in the day was DNS servers. And suddenly when Anonymous came out with low orbit ion cannon, and we started to see a lot more DDoS, and then DDoS as a service, suddenly these people were prepared and had the bandwidth and the capability to protect against it. But there was a time, not very long ago, when there wasn't a very big anti-DDoS market.
I'm curious your take on this, because one of the things I keep looking at is that security that feels like we want to hold on to everything, right? It's like building a kingdom instead of building a legacy. And what it's interesting is, when I was listening to you talk about the way that the market's impacting this, it's not even that it's for free now, it's that it's become an advantage to offer security to other people. Do you think we can start to see the same type of thing in the enterprise space, where some of these things become commoditized and packaged well enough that we can push them out to the edges, and then we can go focus on bigger, better, more complex challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. If we learn some of the lessons from other industries, if you learn the lesson of Walmart, low price, high value, put his competitors out of business. Same with Amazon, right? Amazon put an entire industry, the bookstore industry, functionally out of business. How did they do it? Low price, high value, throw a lot of things in for free. So yeah, if the people who offer these services, carriers and stuff, say, hey, we're just going to solve a lot of these security problems, at the head end, and we're not going to charge extra for it, that's going to be a huge competitive differentiation for them. And I wish they were more forward thinking than focusing on how can they squeeze, every ounce of water out of the stone.
Yeah, and I guess my point too is I see that then as an opportunity for the leaders in the enterprise to say, at least my take, I'm curious your take, I think those who adopt that same strategy internal to their organizations will thrive faster than the people who keep thinking they have to do all of it, own all of it, and make it a pain in the ass for everybody to deal with.
You bet. I mean, one of my predecessors, one of the guys I worked with early on in my career, Andy Jakowith, who you guys may know, he wrote a great book on security metrics, had a saying, own nothing, control everything. It's not about owning stuff, it's about controlling it. How do you control it? Through the management, through the technology, through the abstracted layers that you have of the system. So you can still control things and own none of it. And that's, I think, the radical change that we have to do. But it's about doing what's right for the business versus what's right for us, or what's best, what's most fun, maybe even. A lot of things that we do in our business, we do because they're fun, and we got into this business because, hacking or IT or computers was fun. But now we have to take a more business-focused view of it. And I liked your term, and I'll probably steal it quite often now. It's not about controlling everything. It's about leaving a legacy. I like that leaving a legacy term.
Well, when you look at leadership, right, there's the make your name, then there's the make your, right, like you got to kind of build it up, and then you go into empire building, and then you shift into legacy building. And I think security needs to stop trying to make a name for itself and start trying to build more of a legacy. So take it. It's yours, brother.
I'll play the curmudgeon since Jack isn't here. And
Throw a beer fast. Throw a bear.
Hey, there's no gray hair there.
That's right. No hair. Yes. I think a lot of the how do you say that? Whatever. Jack had to correct me.
Operationalizing.
Operationalization. Yes.
Yeah, oh, wow.
That's a big word. Of security has kind of left security behind and dumbed it down into yet just like another alert that you have to pay attention to, when in reality, that was a really important alert that has disastrous consequences down the line. And I think using vulnerability management as an example, sure, there are some cloud providers like Amazon that have bundled that into the service and said, yes, if you use AWS, we got this free service now, you can do vulnerability management. I think two things. One, these services tend not to be as good as the services being provided by security companies. And two, once it becomes just another operational alert, it doesn't always get the right priority today. I'm not saying we can't get there, but today it doesn't get the attention that it needs. It just becomes another alert. I think the reason why a lot of vulnerability management programs, for example, are successful is because we're the thorn in the side, is because we have to push for it, because IT and operations and even the business doesn't fully understand the impact. I don't put that on them. I put that more on us.
Well, and I would agree with part of that, because right now, as things are fairly manual, that's going to be the way things have to be done. But we have to move to a place where we have more automation, and automation that has concepts of intelligence, so it knows this is a big deal, we need to do something with it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's ways to do it, and there's some interesting people that I think are starting that process. But there's not enough good people to go around. So if I talk to CISOs, the number one concern they have is staffing. How do I find the right people? How do I retain them? And so it can't be manual anymore. The business is too big, right? I mean, my friend Rodney Jaffe used to ride around with John Postel, and they would register domains in a notebook, handwrite the domain down in a spiral notebook, and that's how they kept track of the internet. Well, again, you can't do that anymore, right? And in the same way as security, we used to do a lot of that stuff manually. I used to sit in front of terminals and watch the red alerts and the green alerts, and of course, I think we all become colorblind in that job, because that after you've chased your tail with a lot of reds, they suddenly become green, don't they? So we have to have more automation. We have to have some really new things coming down, and then we need to get the business to buy in and say it's okay to stop bad things. You don't have to ask permission. So change control has to be rethought too.
Paul, this is where I'm kind of driving at this to a certain extent too. There's certain functions. I'll tell you what, right? We'll go out. Most of us on this chat, at least, are speakers. So we'll go out, we in an audience. I can't tell you anymore the number of people who come up to me and say, I'm not in security, but man, I love this, or I agree with this part of it. Why won't you guys let me do that? You tell me I can't touch the tools, or I'm better at that than you are, and I'll work with you. That's kind of my point, as John pointed out. We don't have enough people. Look, I'm leading the charge on why economically that's not really an accurate statement, but for argument's sake, let's say, fine, we don't have enough people. Then we don't need to hold on to everything. There are other people in the organization that are talented at running tools or interpreting results. And if we can push stuff to the edges and push those decisions to the edges, it's like what John just said. We can tell them it's okay to stop bad things. It's okay also to protect good things. And if you need our help, we'll help you. But we've kind of built this up over the last 20 years as internet bad, firewall good, you too dumb, we too smart. We got to stop all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's just kind of my take on it.
Mike has a good point. It's distributing the knowledge. There's a number of good points I think that just came out. One is distributing the knowledge out so that you can scale yourselves as security professionals, because there's a lot of stuff that is really routine work, to be honest, and we shouldn't feel like we should have to control all of that. The second point that came out that I thought was really, really good was that we're sort of in this maturity phase in the industry where we see the need to scale ourselves up, yet we are under-resourced from a human resource perspective. And so what's going to happen here is I think there's a lot of, especially it's pushing on the cloud side, there's a lot of automation going on to try to scale solutions up so that we don't need so many people and so many eyes on screens.
Yeah, and by the way, just if you automate a broken process, you just get more broken process faster.
No, yeah, you get a faster broken process. So there's a lot of interesting. I think we're in an interesting inflection point because I think we're also seeing a lot of enterprises, because of the change in the threat environment, that are willing to experiment with this. So it's such an opportune time.
Well, so let's take that back to John. John, I mean, you're talking to people all the time. Are you seeing this inflection point, or are we just, we've had a little too much to drink tonight and we're a little excited?
No, it's absolutely here. I mean, to your point, automating a broken process is not very valuable, but we think about some of the processes we have. Change management is one that I ding a lot because hackers don't have change management, right? So how are we going to be agile enough when it takes us, 3 days a week to stop something that by the time we've stopped it, the data's gone. So now we're going to pivot. We have these words, pivot, hunt, all these things that we're doing, which really say, oh, well, there's a dead body here, so we're going to do an autopsy on this dead body. Those are the things that kind of bother me. So when we go through some of these automation efforts, that's the opportunity for us to fix broken processes. The broken processes are already broken. They're going to stay broken whether we do them manually or whether we automate them. But the act of automation itself forces us to look at processes completely differently. And that's what's exciting.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that's the real benefit too, right? People in security who say, well, I'm not sure. Listen, the business doesn't know the process any better. It's inherited now so many different people through that when you go in and you ask the questions, they don't know the answers either. So just prepare to spend some time figuring it out with them, not for them, not because they don't get it either. Diagram it on the board. Every time I've done this, somebody looks at it and goes, that's what we do? That's crap. And then you get to go, cool, well, what would you like to do? And you can help them improve that process, figure out where to protect it properly, and then give them some of that power and step back and do the governance. I think John keyed in on that already. We can provide a governance function without having to own it.
And I agree, and I think that Michael really hops on the we don't have enough resources thing, and I think and I think to speak to that point, by enabling IT, by enabling developers to have that security mindset, implement a good process that works, include security in that, it frees us up to do things like, John, you mentioned hunting, which is something I wanted to ask you about. I think it frees us time and security to go do that more effectively. Yes. So, John, what's your take on hunting and threat hunting that we see today?
Well, I think it's an intermediate step until we get more proactive and we can actually stop the real things, right? I mean, one of my pet peeves is this whole prevention is dead, detection is the way to go thing. I think it begs the question, what are we trying to prevent? If we're trying to prevent every time somebody intrudes on our network, no. We'll never be able to prevent all those things, but can we stop data exfil? Yes, I think there's a way to do that. And that's the thing that gets the CEO fired. That's what the business cares about. That's what loses Target or Home Depot $1 billion. What's interesting about our business is if we fail massively, then it is the worst thing that could ever happen to a business, whether it's Sony, whether it's Target, whether it's Home Depot, whether it's Bank of Bangladesh, whether it's TalkTalk. There's nothing else that you can do operationally in any other part of the business to lose $1 billion as quickly as a data breach. So we better figure out how to stop data breaches, or else we need to, train more morticians and medical examiners to do autopsies. That's not how we do it in the real world. We want to keep people alive, and so I say we have to do this in order to keep our bosses employed. I use that great security theorist Mel Brooks, who said in Blazing Saddles, it's all about keeping our phony baloney jobs, right? We have to keep our phony baloney jobs and keep our boss's job in place, and his boss and her boss, and on and on and on, so that we don't end up, being the guy who ran Target, the CEO of Target, who is kind of the poster boy of data breaches now.
In terms of knowing your network, John, what are some of the tips you have for people? We all say we need to know your network, and above and beyond understanding the data, what are some solutions in concept that you see successful organizations implementing that really, truly know their network?
Well, I mean, first of all, I find when I'm doing zero trust work and doing zero trust workshops and helping design these networks, we're doing really three things at the same time. There's a stream just around the zero trust network itself. There's a stream around data discovery and classification and data security and all that big thing. And then there's something about fixing problems in identity, right? Identity is a mess in most organizations. And so you have those three parallel streams happening. But as we start looking at how systems work and instead of trying to just, build a Visio diagram of a network, I always have my clients work on mapping their transaction flows and figuring out how things talk to each other. And if you do that, you start to understand how the network should be designed. It will tell you. And then you can build the network. And so you're seeing a lot of technologies coming from the virtual networking world. Cisco just announced their Tetration project. VMware just bought, or actually I think really spun in, but Arkin, which does that same thing. So now we can start to see what's going on in the network because we have a layer of abstraction away from the hardware. And to me, that's exciting because now you can know how your network works.
But it's the same thing when you design software, John. I mean, you start with how the data flows and what talks to what, and then the software gets developed around it, and it's the same concept.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nobody's reinventing things here. We're just doing it the right way because we now have the technology to do it. I mean, there was a time when you didn't really have the technology to do the right thing. And so when I was doing the early stuff of Zero Trust, a lot of things were conceptual. Now they're real because the technology exists to do it.
And is that technology in endpoint user agents? And how many endpoint user agents can we possibly sustain? And what advice do you have for people? And I think, look,
11 billion.
11 billion. Most enterprises are in that situation where they're trying to solve problems, and some of the solutions are put another agent on the system. And I think this is a slippery slope. I want to get your take on it.
Well, I'm much more about the ontology of our environment is found on the network. So I don't think we can go agent-based. But remember, agents are very attractive if you're a VC firm and you're going to fund a new company because you can figure out what the revenue stream is going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have 8 million users at $1 per user per month. That's $8 million a month. Look, we're all multimillionaires. And it's harder to do that when you have network equipment that can, inspect 20 gigs of traffic at layer 7 and do some amazing things on it. And how many of those do I need? That's a really hard thing to do, right? If you look at SIM tools, how do I price a SIM tool out? Events per second, blah, 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 blah. Becomes very difficult. So people want to push away from that because it's hard to figure out the monetization of it. So endpoints are attractive from that perspective, but you don't control your endpoints anymore. So how are you ever going to really solve this problem at the endpoint level?
John, do you think that they're an easier story to tell too? I mean, one of the things Paul and I talk about a lot is if you can tell a better story and get traction, it makes sense. Feels like I can hold up an endpoint device, I can point to it, show you, talk about your use on it. So that's almost an easier sell than talking about the network. We still today struggle explaining how a packet flows across a network.
You're exactly right. Yeah, because it's physical. You can touch it. I can touch my device. But I hate it because it bogs my device down too. So then you get a lot of help desk calls and people don't know networking anymore. I just gave a talk at the Dallas Cisco Users Group, and I mean, I found there was nobody under 30 there. No one wants to do where I started out anymore. It's not cool. It's not sexy. So we're not teaching that to people. And you're right. It's functionally the packet. Everything that we can know about our environment from an IT or a security perspective is ultimately found in the packet, don't you think?
I agree with you. I mean,
Joff definitely agrees with you.
Well, and I was going to say, Paul, did you come up as more on the coding side or more on the networking side?
Actually, both.
Okay. See, coding for me, I can do it if you force me with a gun at my head and then don't expect it to be good. But the network stuff, that's how I came up. And to John's point, it's fascinating. You go look at the curriculums now in K-12, it's all coding. Coding is the answer.
Because everyone wants to be an app developer.
Any networking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting comment because I think my background's a little bit like John's, certainly like Paul's. I have this enormous background, not only in software development, but I have like 15 years in networking.
The size doesn't matter, John.
Yes, it does. But no, it's
all about how you
very
work your
informative.
packets.
I mean, John's comment is, once you have put together things from a topological perspective, you have solved all these problems on a network protocol level. Communications. I mean, it through and through. And if that knowledge is not being taught or not coming down into the modern world, that's a real shame, because it has enabled me, and I imagine John as well, to have a lot more success in the information security space than I don't think I could have done it, to be honest.
Yeah, and finding new programmers that have that network skill is difficult. And I think it's a problem that we need to solve. I completely agree. You have people who are programmers, and they're writing applications that run on the internet, but they don't understand how the internet works. And that right now is causing problems, not just in an operational perspective, but also a security perspective as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've got people out there that are treating it as this magic box.
Yes.
I just tell it to talk to this thing, and it works.
It's magic.
Yay!
It's
If
magic.
it doesn't work, you lick RJ45 and stick it back in.
Yeah.
Right? No?
And let's take something that I heard you guys talking about, which was DNS. Who knows anything about DNS, right? And we kind of did a bad thing when we were teaching DNS, which we just said, it's the phone book of the internet, right?
Yes.
And what value is a phone book anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Monday I was at an event and I was talking, and there was a young lady there who'd never seen a White Pages phone book and didn't know that back in the day you used to have all your stuff published in it, that she couldn't fathom that. She said, oh, that's crazy, right? So we haven't taught people basic things like DNS, which is the most important thing that you know nothing about. That's what I tell my customers.
I was about to say, I think DNS from a security perspective, an operational perspective, from an everything perspective, is probably the #1 most important protocol that we use. And yet people know very little about it, which is just...
Well, I'm glad we're doing technical segments about it. That's good. John, I have 5 questions for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I am. I'm hoping my Bluetooth battery holds up.
There you go.
Yes.
All right, ready? 3 words to describe yourself.
Older, getting older.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh man, I'm a Texan, so it would have to be probably a Remington 308 with a big scope on it.
There you go.
Oh, I thought he was going to go for packet.
I thought he was going to go for rattlesnake. If you wrote
308 was awesome. I'm good.
if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
How to Escape the Farm.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
That's not really a game we play down here in Texas very often. That's more of an East Coast thing, I think.
Not South Carolina.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
2 celebrities to be my parents. Wow. John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara.
John, thank you very much for appearing on Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Stay tuned. More coming. Don't go anywhere.